Hi, everybody. Good evening. Good evening. Hi. So, it's really an honor and a privilege to be with all of you tonight and to be able to sit under the echoes of helicopter wings and other things that are drawing us, but actually to be able to sit together, to sit as brothers and sisters who are interested, who have a deep issue at hand, a deep issue at stake. My name is David Ingber, and I'm a founding rabbi of a community in New York City called Romemu. And it's an honor and a privilege to be with all of you, and it's also an honor and a privilege to be with Donniel here to discuss your book, your creation. And I wanted to begin tonight with a little bit of a story about a verse that was kind of floating around, not really a verse, but a piece of the Haggadah that was floating around this morning, and also at play over the course of the last 4 days when it comes to Jewish identity. We were singing that today in Chavruta, and I heard other people talking about it, and our teacher Malila spoke about it. And I remember being in yeshiva as a young yeshiva bacher, and I remember my rabbi, Rabbi Aaron Kahn, one morning saying to everybody, I want to let you know that Jewish continuity and Jewish existence is not something that is given. In fact, even though we say in Haggadah, Kamim Aleinu L'Chalotenu, he said in essence, it's not just that it's our own continuity, but he said that no matter how hard we try on Pesach to get rid of all of our chametz, no matter how hard we try to get rid of other things, it always comes back, he said. And he said, L'Chalotenu is the word chalot. And then he said, you see, no matter how much we as Jews clean up our homes from challah, from chametz, it's still there in the Haggadah. But don't worry, HaKadosh Baruch Hu matzah leinu mi'adam, he said, that no matter what, God converts it into matzah. And I was thinking about that because I was thinking about your title, Donniel, Putting God Second, and thinking that no matter how hard you try to put God, let's say, at a distance from the Beit Midrash, every time I walked into that Beit Midrash, I look up at the name Robert Koh God Campus. And in the end, though, you're right, because it is second, right? Second name, it's a second syllable. So we're here to talk about something that won't go away. We're here to talk about an idea, an essence, something that no matter how hard we scrub, it's still there. And I think it's instructive to give a bit of a frame. I'm going to assume that not everyone has read the book, although you have this beautifully done workbook, and you have the book, hopefully. I'm going to assume that you haven't read the book and haven't worked through it, and I've actually worked through it quite a bit. And I just want to give a bit of an overview of the central thesis in your own words. It's a beautiful book. It has 6 chapters devoted to the issue that you want to raise. And in essence, your premise is, in your own words, what does faith in God do to a person? That is, when God enters the conversation and dictates human ethical and social norms, is it a force for good or evil? For action or complacency, for moral progress or moral corruption? And your conclusion, maybe even your diagnosis, is that religion has within it, specifically monotheistic religion, has within it an autoimmune disease. An autoimmune disease. So I'd like to ask you just to begin, can you describe for everybody what is this deep sickness that is at the heart of monotheistic religion?
First, it's nice to be with you. And it's nice to be with all of you. There are many people who love God and don't have an autoimmune disease. There are many people for whom this book is irrelevant, because it is precisely God who is the inspiration for them to do the good. And is God who is the force that enables them to see. And as distinct from new atheists, not only do I want to recognize, I want to give respect to that. I don't claim that God is the problem for everyone. And for a certain group of people, I love that God is first. Because God, by being first for them, is essentially that which enables them to walk in the world and do good. The problem is that for too many people, it is not so. And in general, the strength of a religious tradition is not its ability to speak to the exceptional. Exceptional people don't need religion. They just need to be left alone. And they'll figure it out. You know, they don't have, you might give them some general instructions and then just, go ahead, because you're going to be just fine. Religion is not about exceptional people. Religion is for normal people who live in the midst of fears and imperfections and biases and bigotry. And religion is an attempt to elevate people, to elevate all of us who have such a profound capacity for mediocrity. Mediocrity spiritually, mediocrity ethically, mediocrity emotionally. It's there for us. And it is precisely there. And for too many of us, that it's not merely that we are mediocre, but that religion is actually a contributing factor to that mediocrity. That it's instead of pushing us forward, it is the weight that pulls us down. It's the language that enables our lowest expressions to be justified. Instead of ever feeling, we don't need to feel guilty. When we fail, at least you have a moral conscience, or a community which says to you, "What are you doing? Like, what are you doing?" But it's religion that frees you from that. It frees you in the name of God. You become more blind in the name of God. You quiet more and more voices of criticism. What I mean by an autoimmune disease, and as those of you read the book, I had an autoimmune disease in my life.
Right.
A very, very unpleasant one. And it's this bizarre feeling that, I remember, I couldn't keep my eyelids open after 3 o'clock in the afternoon. No matter what you do, so I remember for years, I used to walk around, my whole body position changed because I literally couldn't see. They did 2 eyelid surgeries, and they were about to do the 3rd until this little intern says, big professor, maybe we have to look at something. This feeling that you want to brush your teeth and you don't have enough power to hold a toothbrush. You literally can't do it. It's like, and you want, what's happening? There's something in you, there's something in you that's working against you. And part of this feeling is there's something that so much evil is done in the name of religion, is there's something in religion,
Right.
inside the system, that's fighting against itself, that maybe even God is not aware of, and definitely religious people aren't aware of.
So part of the paradox of the double bind, at least the way that you play it out in the book, is, and we're getting to these 2 great frames that you introduced, but part of the problem is that God is also the salvific or the source of strength, like your autoimmune system, let's say. So God is both the repository of all these wonderful things like ethical and moral beauty, all of the parts of the Torah that we would love to showcase to all the people that, hey, look how great this product is that we have, how great Torah is, look at all of these wonderful things that lift up ethical sensibilities, and yet that very same force for you becomes the undoing, right? That God, the God that also is inviting, as you say, us towards non-indifference, the ethic of non-indifference, right, is also that that's the problem.
It's God potentially is something that human beings can handle.
Too much God. They OD on God.
It's like
It's
God.
in God's name, G-O-D. We OD on God.
It's like it's just no, a little. It's like as human beings, it was too much for us. This idolatry was much safer. Idolatry was really much safer because it was smaller. You know that when we have this one God, creator of the universe, and we actually feel that that God enters into the room, it is very rare, or it is all too often the case, even if it's not rare, that something happens to us. God enters into the room, we change.
Mm-hmm.
And it is a very natural move. Not to go from God enters into the room and for me to hear God's word to say, love your neighbor. But God entering into the room and me feeling that nothing else is of importance. Nothing else really counts. Now, Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai is a great example in the book. You know, Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai goes into the cave and becomes a God-intoxicated person. And he leaves the cave, and anybody who he sees farming or doing everyday work, he and his son burn them with the fire that is in their eyes. It's like there's something, and their claim is, how could you deal with chayesha, with daily things? God's here. God is here. And I think it's a flaw within monotheism because it makes sense. It's a logical conclusion. If God is here, what is more important? What's more important?
And that's because, I just want to be clear with this, so because of God's singularity, this is a unique feature of monotheism, because this is one of the things in the book.
It's
that,
God's
that
singularity and God's transcendence. God is just simply too big as a singular individual or as a singular being. And it just sucks out all the oxygen in the room. Nothing. This is what Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai is like, what are you doing? How could you, do you realize that you're not paying attention to God right now? Mm-hmm. Well, like one of the texts that this is a text that when I found it, it shook me at the core. When the rabbis want to know what happens when you find a person who's walking in the street wearing kilayim. Here it is, you went out of your house and you're wearing mixed kinds, clothing of mixed kinds. Now, I grew up, kilayim.
You got it checked, when
you get it checked, or, of the things that I really care about.
Not on the top of your list.
Maybe it's 590 to 613. That's like in somebody's,
That's very generous,
like if you speak with a straight person, kilayim, like, is this going to really, how much does it keep you up at night? There's like a lot of stuff before you get to kilayim. And here it is, you found somebody walking in the street. And there's two girsot in the text, whether you find yourself or you find somebody else walking in the street wearing kilayim. What should you do? You went out of your house, and now you're clothed, and you're wearing kilayim. Right. What should you do? And like here, well, this is what Talmud's built for. Like, great. We have these discussions about you find yourself, if you haven't said Shema, or you haven't said Shmoneh Esrei, and you're on the way to the market, and you're working. There's a whole slew of calculations. So you'd expect a Talmudic discourse saying, if you're within the first mile of your house, go back. If you're from a mile plus, you don't go back. But go immediately after you finish, or make sure you're back by this and this time. If you're on your way to doing something leisurely, you go back, even it's up to 3 miles. But if it's going to work, even after half a mile, like we all study Talmud, this would be small for a Talmudic conversation. This is easy. This is just open up the first Elu Mitziot, trying to figure out, what is it a person sees or doesn't see. That's what Talmud's built for, to come up with all of these fictions. It's silent. It says, if you see you're wearing kilayim, strip it off in the middle of the street. And the rabbis say, why? And it could, by the way, entail stripping off from somebody else. And they say, because b'makom sheyesh chilul Hashem en chokim kavod larav. In a place where there's a chilul Hashem, You don't give respect even to a rabbi. And here the definition of Chilul Hashem is anything which does not place God's word as the primary obligation upon yourself, that's to desecrate God's name. Now, and I understand that position. This is a legal expression of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, but instead of burning other people, you're creating a distorted universe. And so it's the uniqueness, oneness, transcendence, dramatic completeness of this being, the totality of this God, that by definition puts everything else in a shadow. There is profound moral consequences to that, and we see it all the time. You just don't see somebody. I don't see you because I don't see the people who are working. I don't see the person wearing kilayim, and on and on and on, because God's there. So this is an example of religion working against itself.
Religion meaning God working against.
Yes.
The God of monotheistic religious faith working against the other element of God, which is promoting a certain ethical and moral beauty.
And that's what the prophets, like the great word of the prophets is when God says in Yeshayahu chapter 1, Mi bikesh zot mikem, Ramos Chatzerai. Who asked you to come give me goats every Rosh Chodesh and every holiday? Who asked you to bring me a goat? And my feeling was always like, what do you mean who asked me?
You did.
You did. So there's God doesn't, it's as if God doesn't fully understand the impact of God's word. Like God thinks, I commanded the ethical. Why aren't you doing the ethical? There's something, God could command whatever God wants, but what is it that happens to us when God is the commander? Now, for some people it works. And I don't want to disrespect that. But for too many other people, and in the world that we live in, we see it all the time.
So I want to actually go through the fullness of the thesis, but I can't help but stop at this moment and remember a story about Yossi Ber Soloveitchik, who once said that when Rabbi Soloveitchik grew up in a world where there had Musar Klois, and they had these places where people would work on themselves, and it happened to be that in his Beit Midrash, above where he was learning with his Chavrut every morning on Gemara, there was like a Musar Klois, and there was somebody in there. And he was like working on himself, and he was saying, Ich bin gornisht, I'm nothing. And it's not the joke, Kuluku thinks he's nothing, but he says, I've never heard someone say I, so many times. And I'm sitting here thinking, have we said God so many times? We put God first to put God second. But just to finish the thesis here, so in your book, you move from this totality of the infinite obliteration of all other considerations, the move from ethical sensitivity to non-indifference to God intoxication, which is the first of two frames that you employ, to be God intoxicated, to be drunk on God, which is a great image, that you're drunk on God, essentially, and that drunken stupor then blinds you morally. As you write here, you said you become God simultaneously and inadvertently makes us morally blind, which then leads to an opposite move, you say, the move away from all of this, the vertical move, my love for God, represented by Avraham in the Akedah, becomes rife for what you call God manipulation, where you manipulate God to your ends. God re-enters into your life, and with that God intoxication and moral blindness, you then choose sides, manipulate God and claim God as your own versus other people's gods, and that leads to the whole extremist fundamentalist mentality that you are trying to name. Am I right?
Correct. The God, they're two distinct. See, when God enters into the room, two things happen. One is some of us contract and say nothing else is everything. God comes first, which means ethics comes second. Not ethics, care, concern. Ahavta l'recha kamocha becomes secondary to whatever it is that we believe God needs from us or wants from us. The second feature is that this God is so great, is that that God also activates a Yetzer Hara. And that's a Yetzer Hara to control that God. if there is only one God in the universe, I want that God to love me best. And so it's this dual move. On the one hand, it's we contract. That's one move. And the second move is we have this Yetzer Hara to be the beloved of God. And that one God could only love one best. The saddest verse in the whole Torah, for me, and every time I come to it, it's by far for me the saddest verse, is when Esav says to Yitzchak and says, do you have anything left? It's like there's something left for me? Like, what did I do wrong? Like, what did I, it's like, and like you sit down and you say, like, why couldn't Yitzchak have said, sure. What I can say this lie. Who cares? First of all, lying, who said it? Who said honesty is an overword? Just lie. Or just say, you're also going to have, I gave him this. But this notion that this one God could only love one best is also embedded within. If the first one, it's the totality of God. The second is the oneness of God. Activates this profound religious fantasy to control God and to be the one whom God bestows the limited blessing upon. And the yearning to manipulate God is not a yearning that exists in idolatry. There is no holy war, as Yisrael Knoll taught us, in idolatry. The first time that there's a recorded statement of human beings killing in the name of God is Moshe saying, Mil Hashem Elai. Prior to, gods could fight. You fight over territory. You're not fighting for your God's honor because there's space. And so that oneness creates this Yetzer Hara to manipulate. And again, it's very paradoxical because one has human beings contracting to such a level that humanity becomes nothingness, and the other one has humanity fantasizing and creating in the name of monotheism the greatest idolatry, and that's the idolatry of self.
Yes, sir.
It's this double move that this one total God potentially creates among some people that concerns me very, very deeply.
And so the antidote now to move to the completion, the tikkun on this for you is twofold. First, recovery. You call recovery from God intoxication, which entails adopting a Hillel model, or Hillel becomes
the primacy of the good.
Right, the primacy of the good. The primacy of the good, or like in, let's say, a Levinazian ethic, the ethics are, as it were, they're separate from God. They kind of exist outside of the frame. The Euthyphros question whether or not God loves the good because it's good, or is the good because God loves it. But here it's clear for you that the good stands alone, and that we have a basic moral intuition. Each and every human being has a subjective moral intuition, and that for you, the great one is Hillel, who is able to say on one foot. So that's Hillel. So you talk about that. That heals us from what I would call post-traumatic God disorder. You call it God intoxication. You're traumatized by that God that is all-consuming, and so we place an emphasis on ethics as a healing paradigm. So can I ask you, unless you want to elaborate on that?
Oh, please.
So when reading the book, I couldn't help but think, and then of course I saw that Shaul Magid asked this question, but I want to ask you again. So what we need, according to you, is to place a primacy on ethics above God. Ethics first, God second. So that sounds a whole lot to me like the ethical monotheism of Reform Judaism. With rituals and here and there, but in other words, so just listening to here, I hear two antidotes to the disease called the autoimmune deficiency of monotheism. One is polylatry or polytheism, because that's clearly avoids some of the things that you say are ethically problematic. We don't have the total God or the Mosaic distinction of Yan, of Asman, this notion that monotheism is violent at its core. So we have a polylatry or a polytheistic model that would allow us to have a great, we'd lose the God intoxication, which might be what the Zohar did. Or we have this ethical monotheism that places ethics first and above all things God-related.
First of all, ethical monotheism is
Which,
not
by the way, leaves you either as a Reform Jew or as a pagan, which is not
either way.
bad.
No, it's like that's the choice.
I know you.
Thank
It's
you.
not, you could choose.
Yeah, good. First of all, ethical monotheism is
Not
not
so
a
bad.
scary. It's not a bad thing. First of all, as a principle, it's not a bad thing. It's good people. You know,
It's like Halavai, I'm a kosher.
Halavai, I'm ethical monotheist. Like that's pretty good. But one of the things that I try to speak about in the book, in the later chapters, is that I'm not advocating for ethical monotheism. The primacy of the good is not the reduction of religious life to the ethical. See, that's what ethical monotheism does. It reduces the whole purpose of faith, the whole purpose of God, and the whole purpose of religious life to shape the interactions between human beings and each other. I am not reducing religion to the ethical. I hate the reduction of I hate that reduction.
You don't want to flatten it.
I don't want to flatten it. I don't want to make everything of value. The only thing that's of value is ethics. Not at all. Spiritual life, experiences of the transcendent. All of these are of great value. The only thing is that they have no value if they don't comply or somehow they hinder your ability to see other human beings. So this is not an ethical monotheism move. And if I would write the book again, I would say this more explicitly. But I say it, but not, I would name it much more clearly, but it's out there, and along with other mistakes in the book, it's just part of life. And that's fine, because it's just a book. You know what I mean? I like the book, but it's like, the Messiah's not here. It's like, and I'm fully aware of that. It's just, the purpose is to put forth, is to add to an ongoing human conversation. I think we do a great disservice. See, ethical monotheism basically says God's first, but dresses God up and changes God, and then what you basically have is when you put God first, you put the godly within us first. And then ultimately God's not first, God's not even in the story. And it's here, I put God second. And as I joke, I'm not putting God 14th. I'm not putting God 22nd. I'm saying I'm putting God, as I said, second's not bad.
So what does that mean?
No, it's like it's not a bad thing.
Right.
It's there. I want it to be part of your life. I want it to be. There's a whole spectrum of religious experiences that I want them to be there. They are because they are, and it's part of what religion does is it opens that life up to you. But I'm frightened when that life
Right.
could subvert something else, and therefore the ultimate test of all of religious life is when you're doing that, in the act of whatever spiritual experience and act you are doing, does it still follow the Hillelian test? That's the way I understand Hillel's statement, this is the whole Torah and the rest is commentary. It's not the whole, Hillel knows that what's hateful unto you, do not do unto others is not the whole Torah. Most of his Torah, which he himself writes, is not that. But he's saying does it fit, does it pass this test? Is it still, are you creating, not that in this moment you're creating ethics, but at this moment, are you violating the principle of what's hateful unto you, do not unto others? If you're not, soar with your spiritual life. But it has to pass that test, and if it doesn't, then it's simply inadequate. I don't mind being reformed.
It's self-indulgent.
I don't mind it being reformed. I don't mind being a polytheist. It's just I'm neither. Even though some of my best friends are. It's just here, this is a book that doesn't want to, it's not going in that choice. I want to try a different. Now I know many people didn't like the title. They didn't feel good about the title because they thought that the title had this either or. And I appreciate that.
Well, it's a little bit provocative.
A little bit.
Which is not a bad thing.
It's not a bad thing, but I didn't mean it to be provocative. It wasn't. I knew it was upsetting, but I did it because that's what I believe. In other words, this just simply says what I believe. I want God in my life, and I want God to be important. I just want God to be second. And so I felt like I have to say it. I don't want to just not.
Right.
I want to say it. God's really, you're second. And if it upsets people, okay.
They'll survive. They'll survive. But I have
Yeah,
another
halavai.
question.
They'll be so upset.
No, but I think that most of us, I certainly, I'll speak for myself, but I imagine many of us here, when we hear putting God second, if it doesn't trigger us or if it's not, overly provocative, we hear kind of nitzchuni banai a little bit. We hear a kind of rabbinic move, and I'm using like Hartman terminology. I like using Hartman terminology. Move.
I get nachas.
It's a move.
I get nachas hearing you use Hartman
I know it's like a move. It's a move. So the move is that, in a sense, kicking God out of the Beit Midrash, kicking supernaturalism out of the Beit Midrash, kicking all of that out, and saying, "Acharei rabim lahatot." There is a notion that the rabbis, in whatever tautology and circular reasoning they had, said, we ourselves are the font of revelation. And that way, we are also going to upgrade the software to make it more ethical with Ben Sura Moreh, Moshe Habertal's readings and so on. Those are kind of rabbinic ways of putting God second in order to place the ethical as a primary moment. But here's the question for you that I was wondering. So I am kind of God intoxicated in a way. That was my way back to Judaism after leaving it for over a decade. And I met a Rebbe, Reb Zalman, whom you know, who was the very epitome of a prayer life. And in essence, I almost see the two of you doing a similar move, but in completely different ways. Like, it almost see Reb Zalman saying, I'm going to be panentheist or pantheist and say God is everything for the sake of humanism, but the God that I make everything is a God that I can place first. Where you say, the ethics that I place first are the ethics that will make me, or the Torah studies or the Torah text that will make me an ethical being, but the God will be second because I'm not, that God is a really colonialist God. That God is imperial. That God is going to try to encroach on my life. And so my question to you is twofold. One is, do you see that in a way, A? B, what does prayer look like for someone like you who's a God-second person? And how do you keep God, how do you keep passion? How do you say, Ad Kan is I'm feeling on fire for you, God, but I'm getting a little nervous here. I gotta calm down because before I know it, my ethics are gonna be out. How does that work? How do you operationalize limiting God passion?
So, first of all, for somebody for whom God is their way back, it's a mitzvah to ignore me. Ignore me. It's like I don't want the response. I don't think I'm relevant to everybody. I think this book is not, it's like anything you write. It's good for some people. And for a lot of other people, it just doesn't work. And that's just...
I have an ethic of non-indifference. I cannot
ignore
you.
So number one, I'm really good with that. And I think everybody who writes a book should recognize that their book is only for some people. I think it's just an important thing to remember.
Can you say who it's for?
Yes, I'll say it.
Okay.
First of all, it's for me. And I'll tell you who I think it's for. So for those for whom it's the vehicle back, I'm right with you. I'm there. Ignore this. But you and I have had conversations about other people. How we also know how renewal in spirituality could allow for a lot of conversation of love and for a lot of bad things to happen. And a lot of people allowing a lot of bad things to happen because the person's really spiritual and deep. And we know it all too well, and you yourself have taken upon yourself a huge responsibility to try to be a force that's a tikkun to that, and kol hakavod to you. But you yourself know, he deserves it. But you yourself know, again, the great danger embedded within the renewal movement. You know it, and so that's God intoxication is not just Muslims, and it's not just Haredim. There's a lot going on, and it's a real problem. So, but still feel free to ignore. With regard to the second question, what is prayer like, and is it possible? I think that's the hardest question to the book. Because I don't know. I can't tell you for sure that putting God second works. Can't tell you for sure. I know I want to try it. I know I'm trying it in my life. I know a lot of, it's a good question. Could God be important? When I say second's not bad, is that enough? And I don't know. I really don't know. I can't say for certain. And I know in my own religious life, it comes and goes. And my faith, I never spoke about my faith with my children because I'm not certain that my life of faith is worthy of emulation. Not certain. Never. I'm not putting myself up as anybody's model of faithfulness. And so the question is one that if I would say, oh yes, there's no, we know that it's more complicated than that. But at the end of the day, I know what I'm more frightened of. And always when you make your choices, it's the question, what is the danger, what's the unknown that you're willing to live with? And I know there could be a price here. But for 3,000 years, we've seen the other price. And it's just getting worse. It's come back into our world in so many different ways. It's come back in the state of Israel in terrible, terrible ways. And I don't speak about that in the book in English.
No, you don't.
My book, because I didn't want to criticize Israel in English. The translation in Hebrew is going to speak much more about Israel and the place of God intoxication and God manipulation in Israeli political life. I speak briefly about it. Israel is just in enough tsaros. I'm not interested in putting, this wasn't the place I want to be in. And this book was written for a larger audience. I just didn't want to be there. But I wrote this book for two core groups of people. One group, small, are people who see the God intoxicated and as the ideal and yearn to become that. They're not there yet. And I wanted to weave a narrative about Judaism that could create an authenticity of a religious life without God intoxication and without God manipulation. They're on a journey. And they see the God intoxicated, the Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai's, as the ideal. And I wanted to show that within our tradition, there's a real fight over what that ideal is. That's one group. The second group I wrote it for, and this is the largest group, is a group of people who, for whom the God intoxicated are the authentically religious, and consequently don't want to have anything to do with religion. And so one of the interesting byproducts, which we're going to see over time, it depends obviously how many people read it or teach it, and you never know, whether putting God second could actually be a significant vehicle for making God far more important. Because there's so many people for whom God is not even 14th. Because for them, God talk leads to God intoxication and God manipulation. And if we create a theological discourse of God second, which is respectful and loving and experiential, but it never crosses a certain line, are we going to open up the doors to that world in a way for the majority of people who are just, the Jewish people, we're the most faithless of any people in the world. So I wonder whether putting God second won't, at the end, be a far greater service to God than the notion of putting God first as a way to save God.
Only time will tell. I think that I was actually going to ask you about like a different achlusiyot, different demographics, and different kinds of people who come. And so you've named two distinct groups who might be turned away from religion or turned on to religion for the wrong reasons, right? Either because of God intoxication or because they think God intoxication is the vehicle. I can't help but, a lot of us were at the Women of the Wall this morning for Rosh Chodesh, and I'd never been there, frankly, and it was my first experience. And And I knew very well that I was going to be speaking to you tonight about God intoxication, and I was essentially, I had a horrible experience of someone who said things to me that I haven't heard someone say those, never. No one ever called me those things.
And they, by the way,
and 10 minutes
when
before
they
I
go
would've-
home,
Yeah,
they don't say it to other people. It's like there's this two people.
yeah,
It's like, they would never do such a thing. It's like you go into certain communities, there is no crime. There's unbelievable tzedakah.
right.
There's unbelievable compassion. And there are times when something happens, and all of a sudden, poof. You know, like we have a research fellow here in the Haredi group. He's a phenomenal man. And he says, you know what I want to write about? He says, why is it that my kids who grow up in the Haredi world come home every Friday with such vile hatred for non-Jews? Okay, and this is not let's dump on Haredim night.
No.
Because, you know, they're like the easy
That's
ones.
another night. but
That's
we-
another night. But it's just like, it's like that same person.
Right,
It's just poof.
Right.
Now again, just to be clear,
right,
I am not claiming anywhere, and I'm explicit, I'm not claiming that religion is the only source for this moral blindness.
no, absolutely.
You know, that's I critique the new atheists for being, frankly, they have amnesia with regard to the 20th century, as if that's it. The only source for evil is faith. Like they forgot for 100 years of what's so. But the fact that religion is not better than communism or various isms is
Right.
not a commercial for religion. In other words, both of us, there is evil which comes from human intoxication
Or ideological
or
intoxication.
ideological intoxication, and there is a particular feature of God intoxication that enables that individual to come and to look you straight in the eye, or like the other day, and say, look at you, and say, Goyim achutza. Like, look, Goyim achutza. He doesn't have to see you. He doesn't have to talk to you. He doesn't have to feel what it is. And he doesn't, not only does he not have guilt, he feels that this action is an act of great religious virtue.
Right. So, but what I want to ask is, so in that moment when I'm with him, and he's calling me a pig and going mechutza and a kelev and all these things, the irony, of course, is that his God intoxication is leading him to this very disturbing, unethical, and immoral behavior. And my God intoxication, or to use ethical monotheism, or my invoking of Tzelem Elohim, my placing God first on him, is what allows me to not fall prey to it. And so the very same moment that, and I'm wondering out loud that I'm sure there are people who have read the book who think to themselves, yeah, but at the core of Jewish ethics, what makes Jewish ethics unique was the call to inherent dignity of each and every human being created b'tselem Elohim, which roots a particular ethical moment in the God place.
I appreciate that, and it could very well be that this book.
But we
is
don't
not,
need it. Do we need it?
No, again, maybe.
We don't need
I don't
it.
think. You see, again, I feel this. It's really just like I'm asking. I want to put God second. I want to put this book second. I really do. It's not for the. If I lived in a world of David's, I would have never written this book. I never would have. I never would have. If we would just be by ourselves here, I would never even think of writing this book. I just lived in different worlds. I lived in really different worlds. I lived in some of these worlds. I lived in personal experiences in my life that it's just I've seen so many other things, and it's because they're not all Davids. There's a lot of other people out there that we have to think whether we don't need to have more ammunition in our God talk, whether you also need more ammunition. Because your talk might work great for you, but be careful. Chachamim hizaru b'divrechem. Hizaru b'shonchem. Be careful. You're maintaining it. But it's like, how many people out there aren't? How many people are using this for a conversation which is of like I write about how, if you look in Israeli political life, The more religious you are, the less you think that Arabs should have rights to vote. The more religious you are, the more you believe that we should discriminate and potentially even kick Arabs out of this country. The more religious you are, the less you're committed to democracy. The more religious you are, and that includes praying for peace over and over and over again, the less committed you are to peace. And so these aren't accidents. So we can't just go prancing along, and part of this is saying to you and to others, start looking at the community at the people out there. We need more ammunition. This is another ammunition. This is another attempt to build a religious life in which God is important. But yes, like I remember Michael Sandel said, if God's on second, who's on first? He asked me. And it's not that...
Who? Who's on?
Exactly.
I mean,
who's on first? Who?
It's
who?
the Kabbalah.
That's exactly.
Me, ma.
Me, ma. Who's
me,
on
ma.
first?
Chochmah.
And it's not that you're on first. It's your neighbor is on first. It's your neighbor. You on first is 20th century danger. I don't want you on first either. I want your neighbor on first. I want moral responsibility to be on first.
Can I ask you, though, like just to push a little bit there, and then I know that, actually have time. So let me push on that a little bit. So you want it to be my desanilach lechavercha lo ta'aved, and it's about the other, the face of the other, it's levinas, it's all of that beauty, but what's the mechanism for self-transcendence? Because if you read, let's say, Jonathan Sachs wrote a book also about this and talking about from an evolutionary perspective, that there are evolutionary reasons for people to be altruistic. Altruism is not actually, it's not actually incomprehensible. It actually makes sense for group cohesion and so on. When groups that work together, it makes it's brilliant. Is it evolutionary imperative? Is it, what is the imperative? Is it Kant? Is it in an innate, intuitive sense that I look at you and if I have an unmediated moment that is your Sinai, your Aleph?
But it's multiple things. It's no one single thing. Human history, it is based on a perception that the human being knows a good. And that doing that good amongst healthy human beings is considered to be a virtue. All of philosophical ethical conversation is founded on that principle. All of it, from Aristotle on. And this is no different. It's human beings, as distinct from other creations, have a moral conscience. We don't have access to the objective good. We might have access to universal principles, but the application of those principles is very, very complicated. And therefore we need growth, and we need to learn, and we need to advance, and hopefully sometimes certain societies advance, certain societies get it worse. But the human being knows a good. The human being knows a good. And the human being defines doing that good as morally and as obligatory. That good, that sense, is what I want people to connect to. And I don't want people to confuse God in there. And I don't want
people to say that sense is divine?
It doesn't bother me.
That doesn't bother you? Okay.
It doesn't bother me at all, as long as you know that you still haven't said anything. Because so now that you've said it's divine, so what are you supposed to do? What are you supposed to do? So that part is, you know what? I'll be just like Maimonides. That's the divine in which you were created in the image of God. Great. But you still got to get to work. Because now how do you apply it? Or just to say that I'm responsible, the foundation of my moral commitment is to see the godly in you. And then I open up Leviticus 25, and it says basically, screw anybody who's not Jewish. So we are somehow upset that the Mishnah and Sanhedrin, the Girsa of Lefichach Nivra Adam Yichidil Amelcha Shekol HaMetzil Nefesh Achat MiYisrael, the Bible says it to you over and again. The Bible tells you over and over and over again that if you're not Jewish, I don't care about you. So even when I'm happy to make a career out of Genesis 1, but we have to know that Genesis 1, like all principles, whether it's the godly within you, whether it's a notion of moral intuition, whether it's a Kantian principle, do not act in such a way unless you're willing for it to be universalizable. Great. Even there too, that could allow for slavery because you don't count certain people in your universalizable principle. Or don't treat other people as if they are a means. Another way of looking at Kant. Never treat a human being as if they are a means and not an end. Great, now tell me who's a human being. Women weren't human beings in Kant's world. So okay, so you have these principles. At the end of the day, as human beings, our job is to think and to develop and to enhance the scope and application of the good that we know. And to make sure that we listen to that voice. And to know fully well that the minute, and this is one of the major arguments in the book, and I know a lot of people have great difficulty with it, is that the minute religion both obligates the good and defines the good, we are missing an essential check and balance in our universe. Because then there's no way to have a conversation. If the source of my good is the godly within me, and then the godly word, and that's where I discover my moral truth from. And then what happens when that word tells you what to do with gays, what to do with non-Jews, what to do with infidels? You're stuck. It's closed. There's no way for you to do the move of Ben Sorero Moreh. You can't even ask the question, what did this person do to deserve death? The question's not even coherent. Abraham's question of Hashofet kol haaretz lo yaseh mishpat is not even a coherent question. Because if God is the source, it's a closed system. And the only word you could say is hineni. So I don't know. We need, as imperfect as it is, human beings need to have an outside source of moral authority to their tradition. For without that, there is no evil, not merely that they will not be able to do, there is no evil that they will not feel religiously sanctioned to do. And our world is filled with, this is not some, oh my God, it's like one of the things I know, you live in America. That's not, that's not Judaism. You ever hear in America, like, liberal Jews saying what's Judaism and what's not Judaism?
Right.
Well, anytime they say that's not Judaism, there's a party in Israel, that's its platform. Not that it's not, it's their platform. There's somebody teaching it in a yeshiva at this moment.
Right.
And there's people taking it really seriously. So that check and balance, maybe God gave us the power to do so. Very possibly. I don't know where. The fact that human beings have a moral conscience is a fact. That's part of the universe, of a human discourse and human civilization is again a reality. We just have to work on it, and it's for some, religion and God pushes them to transcend self-interest, but for too many, religion is the maidservant of their self-interest, and it gets rid of all guilty conscience, and that's the greatest fear that I'm trying to combat.
That's what you're trying to combat. I don't know exactly what our timing is, but I just wanted to lift up just from that very last piece, which was very strong. Thank you. I just want, in yeshiva we say Abba Zoy, if what you're saying, like the extension of what you're saying, and if I'm hearing you properly, the ramifications it is actually a pretty subversive, you're saying something, I think, profoundly subversive here, which is that it's not just, the book's title is provocative, but it's actually only half the story. You're actually saying, not just put God second, but put everything second. Put Chazal second, put Shulchan Aruch second, put any mediation between you and the ethical second to your basic moral intuition, and then read your religion back through that. Check that. That's your check. So whether it's a Chazal from Sanhedrin, or if it's a text from Leviticus, or if it's a Zohar, all of that gets read through this basic moral intuition that we each have.
The Hillelian key, I call it.
The Hillelian key, right.
That's correct. And now, it's like I have
all of it, the whole tradition.
I get two responses to the book. Some people say, oh, there's nothing new. And some people say this is absolute heresy. So I figure somewhere along the line, there's something that I might have said. It's now that point of putting It's Avraham Avinu standing in front of God and saying to God, Ashofet kol haaretz ta'aseh mishpat. Or one of the heroes of the book, and one of my Jewish heroes is Shimon ben Shetach, who says to the bunch of people who take a donkey and the precious jewel is there, and they buy this donkey, and the non-Jew who sold it doesn't know of it, and they ask him, what should we do with it? And he says, give it back. And he says, what are you talking about? We don't have to give back an Avidat Hagoy. And Shimon ben Shetach says, what, do you think I'm a barbarian? And so part of what I try to do in this book is I don't just make the argument, I quote a lot of sources, because I'm trying to tell an inner Jewish story. It's like we have a fight on our hands. We have a fight on our hands of people who have a very strong inner Jewish story. And they quote the sources. And so many of us feel that that's the model of religious life. And we either try to become like them or we leave. And I think our job, all of our jobs, is to weave another story and to tell that story. We can't let these people win. We can't let them win. We owe our people, we owe our tradition, and we owe our God more than that. And they can win. And in many ways, they're winning. And the more faithless the Jewish people become, the more secular they're becoming, is precisely because they're winning. And I don't want to let them win anymore.
It's a good place to stop. So we probably have time for, I think we were supposed to go till 9:30, so we have plenty of time here for questions, and maybe we can get a microphone walking around. Steve?
Moshe is going to give him a...
Okay.
Thank you. So, I'm going to apologize in advance because I hope it doesn't sound disrespectful at all.
Now I'm nervous.
Yeah. I mean, I think you ask very good questions. And yes, we can't cede this to them. But it feels like that's exactly what you've done. It feels like I can't win the God conversation, and so I'm leaving it to them. And I think that there's just too much in our tradition that we can claim, and we have to claim. And so, yes, they manipulate God. Yes, they do all of these kinds of things, and we agree with the problem. But it just feels like you said, I'm taking my marbles and I'm going home and I'm doing it a different way. And I think that could be very dangerous in terms of the liberal ways to look at Judaism.
I appreciate that. And it could be you're right. I don't think so. I try not to. The whole purpose of the last chapter of the book was to avoid that confusion. I am explicitly not leaving the God conversation. I'm trying to change it. Now, for some, change is dangerous. I appreciate that. And for some, change is to alter the whole essence of the conversation. For that, I just, Elu ve'elu divrei Elohim chayim. I can't, I appreciate the argument. Disagreement is a good thing.
I also want to piggyback on Steve. I know that I'm supposed to be done asking questions. I want to get your questions, but I want to say that I was almost satisfied with what you said when we started, which was that you said that you didn't write the book for those who have a kind of natural God affinity, A, and B, you recognize that there are some people who are naturally able to hold down their liquor, so they you can have more God and not become intoxicated. So, but I think that underneath, Steve, tell me if I'm wrong here, but underneath your question though is, in the liberal Jewish world, we don't have Brente Yidden who are on fire for God.
You think that I'm the problem to that?
No, but
you think, let's get clear. Let's just get honest here. I love the question. Do you think that putting God second is the reason why people have not taken God seriously?
No.
It's precisely, where is it? It's precisely in the liberal world that God's not been taken seriously with all the God one talk. So maybe it pays to think about something else. Maybe there's a conversation about God that scares the living fajibis out of people. Maybe people are looking at the world and saying, if this is what God means, I want to have no part in it. Maybe we need to be more clear about what our God conversation is. And maybe when we over and over say, God is not the problem, people are looking, I don't know what you're talking about, because I know that you've tried in all your divrei Torah
to turn me on,
to pick the one verse and to make sure that I never get those other verses. And I know that if there's a really bad parsha, that's when I invite a scholar in residence. So that oh my God, because like, what else am I going to talk about? So let's talk about Israel this week. You know what I mean? Or let's talk about environment, where we cherry pick. And unfortunately, people are opening up the book. They're opening up the book and they're saying, and this is the fascination, why are the new atheists so attractive? Because they're talking about a religion that people know. And we say to them, no, that's not religion, and we're lying to them. Part of what this is an attempt to do, and again, it could be that there's a machloket, and that's perfectly legitimate. You know, like, I'm not, but I'm not creating a dichotomy. Mm-hmm. I'm actually trying to destroy the dichotomy. I'm actually trying to put God back into our lives in a Jewish world which by and large has left God so far behind more than any other religious tradition. People who come to shul, what are we talking about? Where is it?
So
what is it? So you think that if I call that it's my statement about putting God second that's going to take the liberal secular Jew and say, oh, now let's not talk about God? They've stopped talking a long time ago. Maybe more honest talk. Maybe a more honest assessment of what God could really do to people because they know it. They've seen it. Not that they have the Yetzer Hara, but they've seen it by others and they say, I want to have no part in it. Everybody has their stories. I wish people would have stories of how much good God does. They all have the stories of the religious God intoxicated, who's the reason why they don't want to. Maybe we need to. We need a more sophisticated, nuanced conversation. So this is not about getting. This is actually opening up a new door, possibly.
Yes, amen. Sarah Schley, Sarah Leah. Maybe wait for. People won't be able to hear you.
Do you really believe that people have an inner moral compass, and that has history shown that people have an inner moral compass?
I absolutely believe that people have an inner moral compass. I think human beings are capable of knowing a good. I think there's a very big gap between knowing a good and doing the good. People have, together with an inner moral compass, also an infinite capacity to ignore their inner moral compass. But that even Nazis had to articulate their narrative in moral categories. And it required the dehumanization of the Jew and the gypsy and the gay in order to legitimize that which they themselves had already predetermined as the good. And so I think human beings have a clear moral conscience and a moral compass, but there's a lot of things that enable us to ignore it. And one of those things, one of them is when religion, instead of being the advocate for the good, defines the good. I think one of the central jobs of religion when it works well is that it becomes the framework in which you are reminded to do the good that you know. It's like if lo tirtzach is that's the first time you ever knew that, it's going to be too late. Oh, I didn't know. I didn't know. But like if you already understand and have a clear sense of the rights and responsibilities you have to another human being, Shabbat could become a day of reminder of something. In other words, where the our system, or any religious system, when it could become a powerful force for advocating the good, as long as the good is that which it has to serve, and it is not that which defines the good which we must serve. It's when it is the latter that it is blind. It's when it is the former that it could help us overcome the gap between that which we know and that which we do. But I recognize there is that gap.
Thank you.
Fair enough.
Rachel? No, for the TV also.
I was fascinated with the two audiences that you have, those who are frustrated by those who are God intoxicated and those who are so God intoxicated that they need to read it. Clearly I can see how the first group will find the book on the bookshelves on Amazon and read it and go to their rabbis and say, see, you don't need to believe in God. I know that's not what you mean, but they'll read it. But the real issue, it's clear from everything you said, is not that group. It's the group that is already so God intoxicated that they're doing evil in the world. Are they really going to go to Jewish Lights Publishing and read?
Here it is.
or
First of all,
whatever it
it's
is?
Beacon,
How
but
do
that's
we-
okay.
Oh, Beacon. Sorry, it looks like a Jewish Lights
That
book.
changes everything.
Well, then.
Everything.
But again, I was very precise, and I really appreciate the question because it could be that I wasn't clear. I was very explicit. This is not a book for the God intoxicated.
Oh, okay.
It's not a book for the God intoxicated. They're not listening to me, certainly. This is for the book for those who still have a moral compass, but are looking at the God intoxicated as the authentic, significant other, and they will become that. So there's a group in the middle who have not yet gone there. There's people whom we can talk to if we weave a different religious story. The others,
It's like packaging on this, drinking this might make you.
exactly.
It's a warning label.
It's a warning.
You haven't gone in yet, but you're interested.
Yeah, and if you're there, it's, they're not listening
You
to
might
me.
drive while impaired.
Yeah, I'm
once
fully
you're
aware.
in, you're done.
I'm fully aware of that.
Okay.
I might get their kids, though.
Yes, over here.
So I've read most of the book, not all of it, but I found that a lot of it resonated with my own philosophy as a Reform rabbi, and felt that much of it just affirmed Reform Judaism, and I'm wondering how you separate that. I'm looking at your statement, continually construct a new Torah that is grounded in your autonomous moral conscience, founded on the obligations that conscience prescribes. I could have learned that in religious school when I was growing up, although not as well said as you have said it. And I'm wondering, where does ritual come in if that's the priority, and what does that mean in terms of the ritual practice and its place and its malleability?
There's two parts of it. Number one, some ritual is there to advocate and remind you for the good. The other place of ritual is a vehicle for you to engage with God. So ritual has multiple meanings and significance because I'm not reducing religion to the ethical. Some ritual will remind you of it. Some ritual is to open up your mind to a God, creator of the universe, and to have part of your soul engage in a relationship with that God. All of that is there. So it's not an either. It's just not an either or. And the fact that regardless of what denomination I belong to right now, I remember I was once engaged in a debate with an Orthodox rabbi on the role of women in Judaism. It was an inner Orthodox, it was a shul I went to. And I said A, B, C, and D. And the rabbi responded to me, and he opens up a book, and he says, I want to read to you something. And he reads, and he says, this was written by he says, you hear what Donniel, what I just said is the same thing that Donniel just said, right? This was written by a Reform rabbi. So then I opened up a book, and I opened up the Siddur, and I said, Shema Yisrael Adonai Eloheinu Adonai Echad. Reform Jews say that. Are you going to stop saying that now because a Reform Jew says it? So I said, it's like at the end of the day, I don't care. It's like I have a partnership with Orthodox, Conservative, Reform, because this goes beyond how you keep Shabbat and what type of kashrut you want to have. And I believe that this path could be an integral part of any denomination you belong to. And by the way, God intoxication could be an integral part and an integral failure of every denomination, of every one of them. And we've seen our ability. I mentioned one thing beforehand, but it's on every one of the denominations have that capacity. So I do know that there is going to be times where it's like, I see myself as an Orthodox Jew. It is true that I don't see myself as much as belonging to Orthodoxy as a movement as much anymore. Because how much could you belong to a movement and be at profound disagreement with large parts of it? But now there's an open Orthodoxy there. So now there's different moves within Orthodoxy where all of us who felt so completely alone are now getting together. We don't feel so alone, so maybe we're a little more normal. Again, there's different types. But there are times when this voice is going to lead you to do things, to move in a very individualistic manner. And that's why I don't paskin like things that I'm not paskening halacha. It's like I'm not deciding what's morally required. But there are going to be moments where, as an individual, I'm going to make certain decisions, and I'm going to follow that path, which a lot of other people aren't going to agree with. And not only do I not feel bad about that, I feel religiously obligated to do so. So again, we were talking about it. This Wednesday, again, I'm not paskening. It's just like this Wednesday, I'm going to be performing my first Orthodox wedding of a lesbian couple. So am I saying this is what Orthodoxy should do? Am I saying that it's morally required? I'm not doing that. I'm not judging. I'm just saying that given this, there are places that I'm willing to go because I feel that's where I need to go. Will other people reach that conclusion? There could be people in conservative reform, who don't. We have to, at the end of the day, we have to do the best that we can to be a mensch, to live with our God, and to create a life of integrity. And it's not about the movement we belong to, and it's not about everybody agreeing. At the end of the day, you have to stand up and say, what do I have to do? And I felt, so it's true. It is going to move you to different places. And sometimes you'll make mistakes, and sometimes you won't.
Oh, thank you. I think it's beautiful. I was really looking, and you explained it, the idea of how that autonomous power comes in carrying it out.
Yeah, thank you.
And it's also deeply rabbinic.
Yes.
I just want to say that the rabbinic moment of saying "Eit lasot lashem hefero toratecha" is essentially saying that there are ethical moments that trump God and trump Torah and trump halacha and trump all these things. And so, I'm not going to bless you. I will bless you. That I want to bless you that the clarity with which you made the decision to have this ritual moment is the same kind of clarity that all of us, to some degree, will have on autonomy, given what it is. But if there are certain ethical standards that we arrive at in saying, is it ethical not to marry certain people, or is it ethical that we will be able to
rise to... But I want to be really careful, because I made this mistake once a number of years ago. I made the mistake of, because I believed that this is morally required, people felt that I stated that those who aren't doing so are morally failing. I'm not making that statement. Right. I want to be really, really clear. I'm not paskening, not only either in Judaism, I'm also not paskening what to do morally. I'm just saying that within my own, that's what I'm saying, it's not that human beings know the good. We know a good. I'm sitting here with this young Russian woman who converted to Judaism and saying to me, every wedding I've ever gone to in my life, for my best friends, has always been sad for me. And she said, because I felt I was never going to have this wedding. And I said to her, yes, you are. And I felt at that moment I was being a profoundly halachic Jew. Now, I could understand a very profound moral argument which would say no, and which takes into account a lot of other moral obligations. So I want to be really clear. I'm not making a moral judgment as to what's required. It's just that when you feel a moral voice, that moral voice obligates you. And that the reading of Mandalayach Sanui L'Chavracha Lo Ta'avid, L'Chavrach, what's hateful unto you, do not do unto others, that we all apply it very differently and at different times. And that there's times when that voice comes, it's there. And
Mamad Har Sinai.
you can't close your, at that moment, you can close your eye. You can close your eyes to it. But we shouldn't judge other people who feel differently. I hope that's clear.
So, Rev Daniel, very, very good points in this. But one of the things I find sort of interesting, especially as a congregational rabbi, is I was also raised a Reformed Jew, seeing as ethics, putting ethics first. I was also raised as a Reformed Jew, putting ethics first, and that's what, then the need for an aesthetic connection to God led me to be Baal Tshuva, and then finding my way back to sanity eventually. But as a congregational rabbi, especially sitting with so many congregants dealing with very tough things in their life, they need that aesthetic nature of God.
They need
The aesthetic nature, putting God first. At least
why is that the aesthetic nature of God?
But maybe, can we just ask, I just want to find out, I want to test this out with Donniel for a second. If, when you say they need the aesthetic nature of God,
Well,
we
in
already
tough
do,
times in their life,
one second,
maybe.
Jeffrey, one second, I understand, but I'm saying if the God that you are naming, I just want to see if this works for Donniel so we have clarity before the night is over. If what you mean by God is not the biblical God, but an ethical or moral presence, loving, compassionate, maternal, father, mother, sister, brother, if that were the God that you were placing first, would that make you comfortable, or would that also make you uncomfortable?
It's just, I'm not denying that. It's just that God is, I'm not taking away from people that God. I'm not taking away from people the God who walks with you in the valley of shadow of death. I'm not taking away from you the God who loves you and cares for you. It's just that God, a love of God, doesn't mean putting God first. That's all. This is what, if you want to call that, I don't know if it's a chiddush. I don't know. I don't think there's any chiddushim in life anymore. It's halavai v'oti azavu torati shamaru. In which I open up the book. It's all. I don't want to get rid of that God. I want that God. I just don't want the other byproducts. So it's not. It's a different. And that's why I appreciate your question. It could be you're right. I hope you're not. I don't know. As I said, this is and that's why good people could disagree, and time will tell. We haven't created a sufficient religious discourse
But
of putting God, of seeing whether when God is put second, do we still have enough of a God to give? Because it's not taking away the aesthetic, and it's not taking away the ritual, and it's not taking away the spiritual, and it's not taking away God as your ally and as your friend. This has nothing to do with theodicy. Putting God second has nothing to do with God's role in history. It's just nothing to do with the existence or non-existence of spiritual experiences. You're reading putting God second in the same way as if I'm one of the new atheists, and it's not. It's a different conversation. Completely different.
I heard it very clear, actually. You made a very clear statement that I'm thankful is on video, because I think I heard you say that what you're saying is love God, but that doesn't mean you put God first.
That's right.
And I think that's...
But that is a question. If you don't put God first, will He put you first? Especially
if you don't put God first,
if you don't put God first, will
God put you first?
I mean,
somebody
for
thratened me with that. One of the talkbacks
in
in Times of Israel, one of my favorite ones, says Donniel could put God second, but in the world to come, God's going to show Donniel who's first. So I appreciate that. Again, I just don't know. The last line in the book is a statement, but it's a belief and a prayer. The last line in the book is, I do believe that when you put God second, you put God's will first. I don't think the act of putting God second is a rebellion against the God. The whole book is an attempt to create that type of nuance. And maybe, and my argument is maybe, a big part of the faithlessness of Jews. Every single rabbi that I have ever met in the liberal community was asked, do I have to believe in God in order to be a good Jew? There's something going on. Maybe if we create a different religious discourse, we will actually create far much, not God intoxication, but far more love of God than is out there, because there are too many other things associated with it. just again, could be I'm wrong. Like it's the book is a request that you reflect on it, on that possibility, nothing more.
I don't know how much time we have left, Lauren.
Last
One more question?
Yeah.
Okay, maybe Elihu. Perfect to end with someone whose name is Elihu.
Elihu. It's okay. My name is Donniel. Good luck. It's like, what God thinks of me, we're going to have to work out another time.
So I agree that extremism is dangerous, and the experience that was had this morning is ungodly. But I feel that your position is theologically dangerous, and that perhaps what's needed is for rabbis to be able to keep God as first, and then to be able to provide guidance on the process of discernment. And where is God's voice speaking, and where is it just my, it's my Yetzer Hara, or it's my blindness to the godly way that somebody else is doing something, and I can't see that. So I think we need a discernment to help us. We need a process that we can share and teach and learn, where we can learn not to be extremists, right? Because I think the truth is that God is not that extremist, intolerant. Let's just, mow down all the idol worshipers.
See, thank you, and again, it's a very good way to end, because understanding Elu Velu Divrei Elohim Chaim as a deep part of your religious ideology requires of you to understand that even when you believe something, that there is another voice that could be as authentically true. And it could be that you and I just disagree very deeply, and great. We might want to not use the word dangerous, because that might create the type of spirit that we want to create. But other than that, that might go a little far, but maybe I used it too, so what's good for the goose is good for the gander. And it's perfectly legitimate. And again, as I said, I'm not sure. But part of the argument here, and this is my challenge to you, and again, I'm not saying I'm right, is that, we have to put God first, and then the rabbi is going to teach people to do the right discernment. What happens if, as much as you try, something is beyond your control is happening? What happens if you can't control it? And we see that over and over again. And then what we do is we end up just accusing the people who abuse it as somehow not listening, and not recognizing that maybe they are listening. And who's going to save us from you? Not you personally, I'm sure you're fine. Who's going to save us from the rabbis who are going to be the ones? I could tell you stories about rabbis. I could regale you for hours about the rabbi. What do you think? The rabbi, not you. The first day of my coming to my yeshiva, first day, 67 students are accepted to yeshiva. 67. Everybody, there's one person who's the sweetest, most gentle, the kindest person in the yeshiva. He was appointed. He was not a ram. He was just a beautiful soul. He was appointed to be the one who welcomes all first-year students. That was his job, because he's a people person. He meets with everybody according to the alphabet. Aleph, Bet, Gimel, Dalet, Hey, everybody. He comes to Hey Reish, Hartman, and he skips from Hirschman to Weiss. And then he goes on. Goes to Cohen and Levy and the whole thing. And one of my friends goes to him. Here's the person. He's in charge of all. Here it is. I'm in yeshiva just for a few days. And he's in and this is one of the most open-minded, beautiful yeshivot. And this is the most beautiful man in the yeshiva. And one of my friends says, once you didn't meet with Donniel. He says, oh, he's a Hartman. We have nothing to talk about. Who's going to protect me from him? The rabbi who, in the name of his God, he couldn't even see a first-year student. He couldn't even see me. Like, what did I feel? The only child in a whole class, not welcome, not asked, how do you feel? How's the yeshiva experience going? Is there any way we could be helpful? A yeshiva filled with liberal Orthodox Jews. There weren't enough rooms in the yeshiva. So you're supposed to have 2 in a room. They started to put 3 in a room, 4 in a room. There was one child out of 400 people who didn't have a roommate for over 2 years. Who's going to save me from the people who made that decision? Just will tell you, you're not getting it right? You're not getting it right? Who's going to save me from a Rosh Yeshiva who I go to? I go to him and I say to him, Rebbe, I didn't call him Rebbe, I said Kvod Harav. There's a bunch of Cambodian boat people coming into this country. There's a bunch of Cambodian boat people coming into this country. And they're doing fundraisers, and everybody who's fundraising is from this Bezek and Chavrat HaChashmal. No Orthodox institutions are doing a fundraiser. I'd like to make a collection. I was very naive. Really a naive kid. I said, could you please speak to the whole yeshiva? Because I want to put out a box and collect money for the Cambodian boat children. This is in 1978. And then I want to send it in so that here it is from Yeshivat Har Etzion. Look what just came. And I said, and we know, I said, what it's like to be on a boat with no place to land. I'm in his office by himself, and he says to me, Beseder. Beseder? Fine. Next day, bangs on the table before lunch, stops the whole yeshiva for everybody. And he says, yesterday a student came to me and said to me that we have to collect money for the Cambodian boat people. And he asked me to speak to you about it. And he said to me that this is our requirement because we know what it's like to be on a boat with no place to land. And then he screams, Hevel v'shtut, foolishness and idiocy. Now it could be it was foolishness and idiocy. I was in his office. That was the time he could have spoken to me like a mensch. I was his student. He accepted me personally to the yeshiva. What is it in his distorted religious world that enables him not to see somebody? What is it in the world of a rabbi in my army unit who when we took a step back from the front lines and were brought to Karun Lake before Shabbat, and we 25% of all the deaths in the Israeli army were in my unit. And we didn't know who was alive and who was dead. We were the first unit pulled away, and we're sitting there on the lake. And then all of a sudden we begin to realize that there's dead bodies all over the place. Dead bodies in the lake, there's dead bodies all over. Because it was a place, here it was, we're safe, and we didn't realize we landed in a place that there was a battle many years beforehand. And now there's dead bodies all over the place. And I go to the rabbi, and I say to the rabbi of the unit, in the Israeli army, the job of rabbis is to bury dead people. In the tank corps, we only see dead people from a mile away. We don't see dead people up close. We're not used to it. We're not infantry. It was very shocking. says, shouldn't we bury these people? And the rabbi says to me, does this really bother you? Who's going to protect us from the rabbis? Who's going to give us that balance? I could go on and on and on. I'm looking for a balance. I'm looking for a religious tradition where it's clear that any rabbi or any individual who in the name of their God could hurt another human being, could not see them, could create a primacy of my tribe over other tribes, that person is violating the core foundation of our tradition. Could be I'm dangerous. Could be. I'm fearful of them.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not about accepting what I say. It's about creating a conversation, even if you disagree. How do you deal with that danger? And I would suggest that we're going to need more than just saying to people, we rabbis, we're going to teach them that they're distorting it. I think we need a new prioritization of religious language. And if we could create that reprioritization, if we could create the self-evident primacy of the good, and if we could create the self-evident independence of the good, we're beginning to create a religious discourse in which we could open up our hearts to living with God without fear of a consequence that we know that it's not just the errant few, but it's the rabbi, it's the pious, it's the devoted who fail in it just as well.
So I want, before you clap, I want to say, first of all, thank you to Donniel for, let me just say what I'm thankful for. I'm thankful because in my personal career, I had a very different trajectory than yours. In my personal life, I had a very similar trajectory to yours. And the two of us, I think, in some way represent very much this Elu v'Elu. And I want to just say this, that even as someone who came back through someone named Reb Zalman Schachter Shalomi, who on his gravestone has the epitaph, he brought us near to God. Even as someone who is a devotee of his, I say in my shul regularly that if we turn to the Torah and stand and kiss the Torah, but we can't turn to human beings and do the same thing, then that's a chil Hashem. If we treat the Torah as holier than we treat human beings, which we do all the time. And I wanted to say to you that this book, if it moves, I know that it comes from such a deep kavanah in you that you want to see a holier world. You want to see and by holy, I mean a more loving, more compassionate, more sacred world where human life and human value and the values of human life are actually raised up. I wanted to say that if in order to do that, and I think you're saying this very strongly, we have to put God second, that I'm not worried about God at all. I think that God will be smiling in the most incredibly beautiful smile for the world that is, where God is second, so that human beings will love each other more deeply and act more morally and ethically. And I want to thank you for that. So thank you, Donniel.
Thank you.
Right.